Welcome everyone to another episode of the Khalis Podcast, a platform to share the work and thoughts of both aspiring and established writers, poets, and artists who are passionate about preserving and furthering Sikh and Punjabi heritage and identity. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Wasim Ahmed to speak about his debut book, Baba Bulleh Shah, a selection of his Punjabi poetry, which was published by Khalis House on the 25th of April 2024. Dr. Wasim Ahmed graduated in medicine from Imperial College London and has worked in the NHS his entire life. He is passionate about Baba Bulleh Shah's poetry, and we're going to get straight into this. So firstly, Dr. Wasim Ahmed, welcome to the Khalis Podcast, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Ranveer. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So I thought we'd start with a little bit about yourself, your background, and your connection to Punjab and your love of poetry and your journey into writing. How did all of that come about?
Well, Ranveer, I'm originally from Jammu and Kashmir, and I came here to this country, obviously, like a lot of people, as a child. And then I studied, went to school here, studied here, grew up here. And I'm sort of very much a part of this country's culture and society. But I've not forgotten my roots, and I've always been interested in Sufi thought and poetry, and it's something that's sort of always been as part of me. So I've kept up with that. But then, so after school, etc., here, I was lucky enough to go into Imperial College. I studied medicine, and then I went into general practice. And there, I've worked in the NHS throughout the time afterwards. But now I'm sort of reconnecting more with the poetry of my passion, which is Baba Bulleh Shah, but a lot of other Sufi saints as well. I mean, there are too many to name, but I mean, Baba Bulleh Shah is definitely one of my favorites. And
Okay, amazing. Thank you for that. So who was Baba Bulleh Shah?
well, look, Baba Bulleh Shah, if you talk about Punjab and the history of Punjab, Baba Bulleh Shah is a name that is known very, very widely and respected. He was, as I said, I mentioned already, he was of a Sufi ilk, and Sufism. A lot of people feel that it's a branch of Islam, a branch
Yeah,
of the Muslim faith, but in fact, Sufi thought and ideas they go centuries before.
right.
And the if I quickly mention about what that Sufi thought is, and the Sufi thought is basically about love and tolerance of other people. They particularly believe in equality of everybody. They sort of, the whole thing is that they see this world, Ranveer, as part of God and the
Okay,
universe as part of God. So everything is part of God. We are part of God. The world is part. Everything within the world and universe is all part of God. And
right.
what they feel is that it's almost like the metaphor they use is that God is like an ocean of universal love. And
Okay,
within that love, everything else is floating around, and this world is floating around. And that's in there's very many poems, etc. He mentions this, and Sufis mention this. They see it as an ocean of universal love, and we are within that, and we're part of that, and God is part of us.
right.
And the Sufis, they what they tend to do, and what Baba Bulleh Shah certainly does, and he mentions in his poetries, he sees God in everyone. So he
Right.
sees God in everyone and everything. So it doesn't matter to him, what creed somebody belongs to, what color they are, what gender they are, what their thoughts are. Doesn't matter the lowliest person carrying out the lowliest job, lowliest kind of work. they still have God within them, and we
Right.
should recognize that God is within all of us. So Baba Bulleh Shah himself, if I describe a little bit about his life story, is that he was born in 1680. And he was born in the Punjab, but not far from Lahore, sort of 50 miles odd, in a small village called Uch Gilania. And
Right.
it's still there at the moment, Uch Gilania. And he was born to a very distinguished person in his own right, that his father was a mullah, a village mosque priest. But
Right.
as you will see in the book, their ancestors came from Syria, and they themselves, a couple of hundred years beforehand, and they settled in the Punjab. At that
Right.
time, Ranveer, there was kind of learned people, religious people were migrating towards India, towards Hindustan at the time, as it was. And they came with a view to bettering their lives. Maybe they came to preach about Islam. They came to, seek a new life. And their interaction with the Hindustan came with the people in the Punjab. And
Right.
so a lot of the Sufi saints from those times, they settled in that region. And the interaction happened between the Islamic Sufis and the local Hindus and Buddhists. And this process had been going on since a millennia now. And
Right.
so it had gone on a long time. And what happened was that the impact was two ways. It wasn't just Islam being preached to the local population that was there at the time, but it was that these learned people, they learned the local religions and divinity. They learned about the culture, and they saw that there was a lot in common.
Right.
And so they kind of, so it impacted their thinking and their belief. And a lot of the beliefs and the poetry that Sufi poets have written is inclusive. They tend to over ride any kind of religious divide, any kind of
Mhm.
racial or cultural divides or anything like that. So Baba
Right.
Bulleh Shah was one of these great, great poets. And his life story, I've taken the time to write it without really going into kind of legends and myths in the book. It's a very interesting little chapter. But the thing about it is, Ranveer, is that the times he was born was an extremely difficult and turbulent time in the history of Punjab.
Right.
Punjab was a vast, vast province at the time, and there were tensions, and there was a lot of conflict going on, and I'll go through that in the book. But talking about Bulleh Shah, he tried to uh, teach people not to get into that kind of discord, to overlook any of the differences and to live together. And he's developed this Sufi path, which is usually to find a particularly learned murshid, a guru, who will then look after your spiritual teaching. But the main aspect of that is that with Sufi thought, the Sufis believe that God is within us, and we want to make a home for him in our heart.
Right.
And they feel that there also within us is this ego, the
Hmm.
ego we all have, and that ego is a very slippery, tricky aspect which can deceive us. And it can, even good things, it can turn into bad. So what the Sufis way of dealing with that is that they put that ego into the hands of their murshid or their guru, and then the guru monitors their behaviors and whatever. And
Hmm.
if they show any signs of their sort of ego coming forward, the guru will pick up on that. The murshid will
Right.
pick up on that, and he will guide them towards the right path. So Baba Bulleh Shah's poetry was immensely popular. And what happened is that all these Sufi saints, they were very liked by the people at the time.
Hmm.
There wasn't any democracy or anything like that. As you know,
Sure.
in these times, there was autocracy. And so what happened was majority of people, they couldn't really voice their feelings about the injustices, inequities in their lives and everything. And the Sufis, these Sufi saints and poets, they were in a position where they were not afraid of the leaders. In fact, leaders treated them with care because they had such vast followings of
Mm.
admirers and people, and they voiced the people's concerns. And then often the rulers would take note of what somebody was saying, and
Right.
like this. So Baba Bulleh Shah was immensely influential, and his poetry is very, um, I would say, it's very clear in its message. He doesn't
Okay.
mince his words around.
Yeah.
He says the truth as it is without fear, and he criticizes whoever he feels is doing wrong. And this is the sort of reason why people loved him then, and this is still the reason why people love him to this day. You know, they still sing his poetry, they recite his poetry, they go to his shrine, and what they do is it's because it's speaking what's in people's hearts, and
Right.
it's saying things. And majority of people still believe in this fact that, look, to change the world, we have to change ourselves. You
Hmm.
know, we can't make other people change. You need to change yourself and do good
Sure.
yourself. So incredibly influential Sufi poet, philosopher, saint, humanist. He was more for, he felt that humanity
Right.
was the key.
Right.
And
Okay. That's
so
interesting.
that's his background.
Yeah, thank you for that very comprehensive overview. I mean, I like how you kind of differentiate at the beginning there, that it's not a branch of Islam, because that was my kind of understanding that, it kind of predates in terms of Sufi thought. Um, so yeah, that's really interesting to hear. You mentioned that there have been obviously a number of other Sufi saints as well. And from my perspective, I know of Baba Faridji's writings, obviously, which are included in Gurbani, and you make reference to that as well. But in terms of this specific book on Baba Bulleh Shah, tell us a bit about the book in terms of the format and the inspiration behind it in terms of the poems that you've chosen, and obviously you've included both Shahmukhi and the Gurmukhi along with an English translation and transliteration. So what was the thinking behind that?
Yes, Ranveer, before I go to that thing, I just want to make one thing clear. I mean, it's my opinion that Sufi thought predates
Right.
Islam.
Okay.
It's not. I mean, majority of people in the world, they treat it as a branch of Islam, but it's
Okay.
it's it's my opinion. The way I think is that I see the Sufi thought and Sufi ideas in prophets long gone, Old Testament prophets, for example, even. So it's not, I wouldn't call that a standard
Right. Okay.
belief.
Thank you for clarifying.
And yes, and I wouldn't want to offend anybody by saying this, and it's just
Yeah.
my opinion that
Sure.
I see it in that way. Now,
Yeah.
the thing about the the inspiration behind it is really that Ranveer, I mean, as I said, I grew up in this country, and I'm very much part of sort of British culture, and my language is, I speak mainly English, but
Yeah.
I haven't forgotten my mother tongue as well. And being from Jammu and Kashmir, I don't know if you know, but Jammu and Kashmir is divided between India and Pakistan. And I'm from the Pakistani side, which is the next state along from Punjab. So we're not far from Lahore or anything. And we, in fact, in this part of Jammu and Kashmir, we speak a version of Punjabi. And so, we've got very close links with the Punjab. And
Right.
of course, Kashmir was part of the Punjabi, the Sikh Empire for a long
Of
time.
course.
And so the thing about it is that my inspiration was that, you know, um, I've been following Bulleh Shah for a long time, and I was looking at his poetry and various books and things that have come out. And there is people are always emotionally impressed by what they hear. But what happens is that the Punjabi language, Ranveer, as you know very well, has changed a lot. And so what's happened is that 19th century, the modern Punjabi that's come about is very different to the Punjabi of Baba Bulleh Shah's time or
Right.
of the Sufi saints from before. And so, what I also felt was that a lot, like myself, being an immigrant to this country, now we're in second, third generation in the West. Punjabi-speaking people are throughout the world, and a lot of them wouldn't be lucky enough, like myself, to have remembered some of the Punjabi and improved on it. But a lot of the people now, they will be speaking English as their first language, and they
Mhm.
may understand some Punjabi, but it's not to the level of being able to work out what some of these thoughts were.
Right.
So the my main reason when I was looking at these various postings on the web, etc., a lot of the translations I felt were, they didn't do justice to some extent, in the sense that some of the words are very difficult to translate. And as you know, Punjabi is so rich that, one word, Ranveer, can mean five or six different things. And if you try to interpret it in a sort of like rigid manner, it will, you lose the context. And so the idea behind it was that the Punjabi speaking people, main now in the West, who are not able, perhaps, or not familiar with reading Punjabi. They may understand it, but they're not familiar with the language fully. That I would try and translate some of this Baba Bulleh Shah's work, which is their heritage and it's being lost, translate it into English so that it would people can see their culture, and it's culture well worth preserving. It's being lost gradually to foreign languages. And so partly it was to preserve the work by translating it into English, which is the main language at the moment. And
Right.
so that was one aspect, but also to introduce it to a new generation of Punjabi speakers, and to try and show them that we have got a history and culture of our own, which
Hmm.
is something to be proud of. And because you often see that people, if they lose their language, they lose their culture, then it leads to alienation
Hmm.
and low self-esteem, etc.
Sure.
So in terms of the what I've done with the book in terms of the language is that, as you say, Baba Farid ji, he was a contemporary of Rumi, by the way. And Rumi, as you know,
Right. Right.
is, yeah,
Rumi is very well known, isn't he?
yes.
Kind of, he's everywhere, right?
Absolutely. You
Yeah.
mention it to any child on the streets in this
Yeah.
country, in America. As I put in the book, Rumi always tops the poetry readings in America. And everybody's heard of Rumi. Now, the thing about it is, the reason for that is that his work was translated 200 years ago. And,
Right.
and it's been, so it was preserved, and then
Yeah.
it's been there as part of the Western thought and culture as well.
Sure. Sure.
So what I thought is that, why isn't that sort of thing happening with our culture, with Punjabi
Yeah.
culture? So what I've done is that trans first of all, I wanted to try and translate the work in a sympathetic, simplified manner so that
Right.
one could understand it. And secondly, I've also written the original Punjabi, which is of two forms, Gurmukhi and Shahmukhi. And the reason I've done that, Ranveer, is that a lot of people who are familiar with the Punjabi language itself and they can read it, and I'm one of these people, that what happens is I love to see the original.
Right.
Okay. I love to read the original poem, and then when I read the whatever translation it is, then I compare the two in my own mind. And each time you might see a different nuance that is in
Hmm.
the translation. And
Hmm.
so it's very important that I didn't just translate it and leave it as a translation, but I wanted to actually put the originals in so that people who they could read it, and then they could compare it and see, if they can't make full thought about what it's saying, hopefully the translation will give them a little nudge towards
Yeah.
what it's going. And, so that would help. And in terms of the what I've done is, I've also, people who are not familiar with reading Punjabi at all, I've done a transliteration. and the transliteration is totally phonetic. So, because the thing about the poetry is it doesn't come across in the translation, but it's written in a form called kafi, which is like 4 lines, quatrains they're called, and they are rhyming. They rhyme with such power, the poems, that you can't get that in the translation. But if you read the transliteration,
Right.
you can get that. And
Okay.
so I did that. So for people who are unfamiliar with reading Punjabi, they've got that of the original poems as well. And I've written both Gurmukhi and Shahmukhi. These are the two main versions of Punjabi that the poetry was written in. And if I say to you that the Punjabi language has evolved, it's as I said, Punjab was a vast province, and so there are different dialects to it, and it was written in different forms as well.
Right. Right.
And as it evolved, sometimes one particular alphabet might have been used, sometimes another alphabet might have been used. So there are differences between the two versions, the Gurmukhi and Shahmukhi, is that the Gurmukhi language, also called the Charda Punjabi, it means like the sunrise Punjabi or the Eastern Punjabi.
Hmm.
That was Punjabi that the Sikh gurus used and functioned with in their courts and in their um, society. And it was because of the various diversions in it, it was organized and standardized by Guru Angad Dev Ji,
That's
who
right.
formalized it into a form of called Gurmukhi, and it's written in that form in the Eastern Punjab. So people from Eastern Punjab nowadays in India, they will be familiar with reading Punjabi in that text. The other version is called Shahmukhi, and this is Lenda Punjabi, which is Western Punjabi. And this is the form that's used in Pakistan and people. And in this form, the Arabic alphabet or the Persian alphabet, which was the official language of the Mughals
Sure.
at that time,
Yeah.
this is written in that form. And this is
Mhm.
read from right to left, whereas Gurmukhi is left to right. So there's differences, but the language is the same, and it's just written slightly differently. And I thought, it would be good to reach a wider audience. So it doesn't matter whether you read Gurmukhi, Shahmukhi, we've included both. And then people can get the feeling of the original through there as well.
Absolutely. You've spoken there about the vastness of Punjab, and I think the fact that you've included both scripts, both the Sharmukhi and the Gurmukhi, speaks to that. Because even within what we now know as East Punjab, which is kind of just in India,
Yes.
um, we published a book a few years ago, which was about Punjabi proverbs, and within that, the author Kuljit Kaur, she mentioned how even within East Punjab, which is the kind of the teardrop shaped Punjab today,
Yes.
is every 10 kilometers the dialect, the Bolli changes.
Ah,
So I can only
yes.
imagine, in the greater Punjab, which encompasses modern day Pakistan and obviously
Yeah.
Jammu Kashmir perhaps,
Yes.
how vast that would have been. So I think the fact you've chosen to include both scripts is
Absolutely.
again very inclusive and obviously in the spirit of Bulleh Shah as well. I think
Yes.
that's a
Absolutely.
really good thing you've done.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's very important to realize, Ranveer, that the Punjab, the people of Punjab, they're all they do think alike, even though there's a divide. But Punjabis everywhere, they all are of a
Absolutely.
similar ilk and similar thought, and that book is very, very interesting. I really enjoyed reading the proverbs and everything. And there is a proverb in there which is relevant to this book as well, of Khada Pita Laida, Baki Ahmed
Ahmad
Shahida.
Shahida, yeah.
Ahmad Shah Abdali was a massive pain at the time for Hindustan and for the Mughals, and that saying, it just encompasses
Sure, sure.
what was happening. As I said, it was very turbulent time at the time, and
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's go into the book then. Obviously, we've spoken at length about the format, the thinking behind it. Would you like to share a poem from the book, perhaps one of your favorite ones for the benefit of our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, Ranveer, what it is that these uh, kafis, a lot of them are just 4 line ones, and some of the longer poems. I've included all my favorites.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so they're all my favorites. And
Right.
in fact, I mean, today, Ranveer, I'm actually going to read for you, and this is one of my favorite poems as well. It's number 25 in the book, and it's called Take Out This Timekeeper.
Timekeeper. Right.
Okay.
Okay. Yes.
And in
Yeah.
Punjabi, it's Gadiali Devo Nikalni.
Right. Okay.
कड़ियाली देवो
Okay.
निकालनी ठीक है और
Yeah.
ये just before I start the poem just to say that this poem there's an amazing and one of the best versions of this poem and these poems are not meant to be just read but they are recited
Recited
and then
sung.
they're
Yeah.
sung and the
Mhm.
best version of one of the my favorites is Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan.
Okay.
And if the listeners go into YouTube and look for Gadiali Devo Nikalni and Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, and if they listen to
Okay.
that, it will give them a feeling of how this would have been sung and performed at the time that Baba Bulleh Shah wrote it,
Right.
and
Okay.
and how it was meant to be performed. And before I started as well, just very quickly, is that the premise of this poem is that, as I said already, that Sufis they spend their entire life trying to see the light of God in their heart. They want to make a home for their heart, for God in their heart, Rab.
Right.
And they spend their whole life and they're not successful. Not, a lot of them might not be successful. And, you'd be very lucky if you see that light. And Baba Bulleh Shah was one of those people who found the light in his heart.
Right.
And in this poem, it's laid out in the way that imagine it's imagine it's a woman's wedding night. Okay,
Okay.
so if you imagine that it's a woman who's just got married, she's got these aspirations of happiness for the future. She's completely fulfilled in her desire of finding a loved one,
Right.
and being together with her loved one. And so it's from the point of view of sort of what feelings, almost like the feelings somebody would experience if they achieved their desire of
Right.
meeting their loved one.
Okay.
And of
Okay.
course Baba Bulleh Shah is talking about God, but it's
Sure.
Sufis in
Sure.
the sense. So
Yeah.
if I read it in Punjabi first, it says घड़ियाली देवो निकालनी मेरा पिया घर आया लालनी. So this is saying Gadiali is Gadial is a wall clock, a clock.
Hmm.
Yeah, Gadial.
Hmm.
You probably know this.
Very. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So Gadiali is the person who keeps time, is
Okay.
the
Okay.
thing that keeps time. And in this poem, Baba Bulleh Shah is using the metaphor that the heart, because it's beating like this rhythmically, it's a timekeeper.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so it's keeping time, and what he is saying is that now that he's fulfilled his desire and he's found God and God's come into our house, he wants this timekeeper to be taken out and thrown away, got rid of, because
Okay.
he wants to stop time.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he
Okay.
says, Karyali Devo Nikalni Mera Piya Karaya Lalni, which I translate as take out this timekeeper, my precious sweetheart has come home. And sweetheart is a term they use for Rab and God. He's like a beloved.
Sure.
And then the first paragraph is Kadi Kadi Kadyal Bajaye Bajave. Rain Vasal di Pya Gatave. ਮੇਰੇ ਮਨ ਦੀ ਬਾਤ ਜੇ ਪਾਵੇ ਹੱਥੋਂ ਚਾ ਸੁਟੇ ਕੜਿਆਲਨੀ ਕੜਿਆਲੀ ਦੇਵੋ ਨਿਕਾਲਨੀ.
Okay.
So he's saying that this sort of timekeeper here is like keeps beating second by second, and by doing that, every beat is another second passed of time, isn't it?
Right. Okay.
So
Okay.
this keeps beating and it's keeps passing the time, and by doing that, it's kind of like cutting short this meeting with my beloved. If the time keeps going, like if keeps beating like this, then
Right.
I'm going to run out of time. So
Missing out.
it's
Yeah. Okay.
shortening the night. If the Karyali could understand my mind's desire, it would pluck out this Karyal and throw it away itself.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Right.
he really feels that if if my mind could understand my desire, he would do it himself. He would just take out this clock and get rid of it and stop time. That would be the end.
Right.
He would be forever with God.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And then in the next verse, basically, he's talking about this union and he's describing the Muslim description of paradise. Okay, so
Right.
this next paragraph is about what he's experiencing, and he's using the metaphor of what Muslims believe paradise is like. Yes.
Right. Okay.
So he says, Anhad Baja Baje Sohana, Mutrab Zugra Tan Tarana, Pula Som Salat Dugana, Mad Pyala Den Kalalni, Karyali Devo Nikalni. Now,
Hmm.
this is a description of where he's at. He's in paradise, and this is a Muslim description of paradise. And
Right.
in paradise, he says, never-ending beautiful music is playing. So in paradise, the Muslims believe it'll be beautiful, gentle music playing all the time.
Right.
And the musician, who's that? Who will be playing that musician? He's the beloved, isn't he? He's very handsome, and his music will be perfect, isn't it? So
Hmm.
that's what he's saying. He's describing that he's imagining he's in paradise. And then he says, in paradise, of course, there's no fasting, there's no prayers, there's no rituals or anything, is there?
Hmm.
So that we are living in constant bliss. So he's saying, forgotten have I fast, prayers, and rituals.
Right.
So he's in such a state of um, happiness and ecstasy that he's
Right.
forgotten all of these rituals. And
Okay.
now the bartenders are offering goblets of wine. In paradise, wine is halal, and Muslims who are in paradise will enjoy wine. They will be
Right.
offered goblets of wine to drink, and they will be
Okay.
listening to music, and they will be in bliss. And
Right.
so he's saying bartenders are now he's got no worries. Everything is now as in
Okay.
paradise. Yeah. So
Okay. Okay.
meeting the beloved is like being in paradise. Yeah.
Hmm.
And then the next paragraph, Dukh diliddar ut gaya sara, mukh vekhya te ajab nazara. Rain vadi kuch karo pasara, din agge taro diwalni, kadiyali devo nikalni. So this is saying all my sorrow and grief has been lifted by his union with God, by God coming into his heart. All his sorrow and grief has been lifted. When he's seen God's light and God's face, it was a wondrous sight.
Hmm.
Yeah. The night is passing, it's every beat is going and the night is passing. Do something to prolong it, do something to stop the night passing. Put up a wall in front of the coming day. Just stop it somehow. I
Hmm.
don't want to
Hmm.
get through this night.
Right.
Yeah, I want to stay with one with God. And then the last one is him describing about his experience. And he says, Bulia, show the sage pyari, neeme tar nihare tari. ਕਮੀ ਕਮੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਆਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਹੁਣ ਵਿਛੜਨ ਹੋਇਆ ਮਹਾਲ ਨੀ ਕੜਿਆਲੀ ਦੇਵੋ ਨਿਕਾਲਨੀ. And this is saying, Bulia, his beloved's abode, his beloved, he's at, it's the bride, she's at her beloved's house, the beloved's abode or place. Bulla loves that place. And he says, I didn't know the way how to succeed, but somehow I floated across. I somehow found my way across difficulties, and I've managed to find God.
Hmm.
And he says, he obviously recognizes that not everybody is so lucky. And he says, so rarely has my turn come around. His
Hmm.
turn, as in, God doesn't bless everybody with a feeling like that. And can you imagine out of billions of people, if it's very
Hmm.
rare that he
Hmm.
would come into somebody's heart. And he says, so rarely has my turn arrived that now I don't want to let go of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
because how who knows when he would see God again. So
Hmm.
you can see the various the way the metaphors are used to describe the feelings of fulfillment and of desire to be one with the beloved, and the
Yeah.
beloved is our God. Yes.
Right. Right. That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's really important to kind of, I guess, you know, appreciate that obviously Sufi thought is a standalone philosophy, right? It has its own specific aspects, even though it's speaking about these perceived universal, values or states of being, compassion and love and recognizing, that God is to be within everyone. But there are, so although that's a separate kind of standalone view, I can see reading this poem and some of the other poems how there are similarities in the thought between, for example, what the Guru speak about. Especially with this idea of like the ego. You spoke about the ego earlier about, making how the
Yes,
ego tricks us,
yes,
right?
yes,
And that's a very big theme that comes time and time again in Gurbani as well. And I
right.
guess Bulleh Shah was, this is why perhaps his poetry was so had such an impact at the time because a lot of these things, they do transcend different religions, right?
Yes,
And he's quite outspoken about that as well. Um, I wanted to ask, you've spoken briefly about the kind of how it was quite turbulent times. He was born in the 1680s. From a Sikh perspective, that was 5 years after the beheading of Guru Tegh Bahadur, and I know you make reference to that in the book as well. But how was he received generally by his contemporaries? I know you've mentioned that he had quite a large following. But what was the thoughts of perhaps the rulers and the governors towards him as well? If you could share maybe a bit about that, because
yes.
he's very outspoken, right? He doesn't mince his words like you said.
No,
He's yeah,
absolutely not. He was fearless, Ranveer. I mean, for someone, but so were a lot of the other Sufi saints as well.
right,
They spoke the truth, and they were, if you imagine it as a kind of a vent, the rulers recognized them maybe as a vent for feelings of the people, and they will have listened to some of these respected saints and Sufis to some extent, and because they were affected by this poetry as well, I'm
right,
sure. So they were like a vent for giving sort of these rulers an idea of what the people were feeling. But now the thing about it is that at turbulent times, if I say to you, yes, it was extremely difficult time then. The thing about it was that for previously it had been a society made mainly of Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims, and that it was a plural society. And if you imagine that these people, they lived, they if I mean here in this country we everybody lives, it doesn't matter what faith we are, we live sort of happily together. At that time, what happened was that it was together, but it was slightly apart as well, in the sense
right,
that you would have a predominantly Muslim village, a
right,
predominantly Hindu village, maybe a place, areas where there were predominantly Buddhists. And so all of these people, there would have been other people, the odd people around as well, but a village would have its identity,
right,
as a Hindu village or a Muslim village or whatever. And and when a person from the a different sort of faith went, they respected that,
right,
and they people, it was, they had no problems about each other. But when they interacted with each other, they respected certain boundaries, and
right.
this is how they got along. You see, it was all part of the same thing. And so, for example, the Muslims wouldn't just go into a Hindu village and start doing something that's against their beliefs, and
Sure,
the other way around. And if somebody did that, it caused problems. It caused violence.
right,
And the thing about it is that the turbulence was partly because Punjab at the time was going through an extremely difficult time. What had happened was that the Mughal Empire had reached its zenith, it's reached its peak. In the
hmm
1650s, Shah Jahan had built his Taj Mahal.
hmm
And that, to most people in the world, they're familiar with Taj Mahal. That was the pinnacle of kind of Mughal
right,
supremacy. And after that, of course, things began to change, and there was the change started because Shah Jahan had two possible heirs. One was Dara Shikoh, and one was uh,
Aurangzeb.
Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb Alamgir, he
Hmm
titled himself. And so what happened was that it was a difficult decision for him to make as to which one he wanted to succeed him. And in terms of normal setup, it was going to be Aurangzeb. But what happened was that Shah Jahan fell ill and he preempted things and he named Dara Shikoh as his heir. Of
Right.
course, this then set up a war between the Mughals themselves, and Aurangzeb took up arms against his brother. They had a massive battle and they fought, and he defeated Dara Shikoh and killed Dara Shikoh and took the crown himself.
Right.
After that, he then imprisoned his father, Shah Jahan, opposite the Taj Mahal at Agra for the rest of his days, declared him unfit to rule,
Right.
and then he took over. Now, the change was that Aurangzeb was much more of a religious bent than the previous Mughals had been. They'd been relatively, although they were clearly Muslims, but they'd been relatively inclusive, and they
Right.
had worked with all the people that were under them. And not that Aurangzeb excluded anybody or anything, but he felt that the Islam was the identity of his state and
Right.
wanted to be the identity of his state. So he, in fact, declared, have had this fatwa declared, which is a religious edict called Fatwa Alamgiri, which then can change the Hindustan of the time into an Islamic state. So
Right.
this had an impact on people day-to-day living, and from the Muslim point of view, what it did was it affected Muslims in various ways because singing and dancing and music were banned.
Right.
You can
Right.
see the kind of the links from nowadays as well. So there was a lot of and Muslims and the idea was that the Muslims behaved more religiously, perhaps, and asserted their religion more to some. These are my but I'm not an academic, but these are
Sure.
kind of like my feelings as to how things may have been. And if there are academic people out there who differ from
Of
any of these,
course.
I apologize
Yeah.
completely. I'm only describing my own opinion. So what happened was that this affected Bulleh Shah because
Sufi, of
Sufism
course.
is
Yeah.
about singing and dancing and becoming
Expressing
one
yourself. Yeah.
with God.
Hmm.
It didn't stop Bulleh Shah because where he was, he
Mm.
carried on, and this annoyed a lot of the religious elite, etc. But anyway, after Aurangzeb was the kind of the last emperor, and he saw this emerging threat from the Sikhs, and Sikhs were gaining in numbers. As I said, the world was changing. There was a massive change in the Punjab at the time, and uh, followers of Baba Guru Nanak Ji were increasing in numbers, and they were wanting to just live in harmony and peace. But
Mm-hmm.
the Mughals saw them as a threat, and
Right.
Aurangzeb wanted to eliminate uh, any kind of Sikh power base, especially in the Punjab, which was the main area. And so, for example, like you've said, he executed Guru Tegh Bahadur 5 years before Baba Bulleh Shah was born. But
Right.
Baba Bulleh Shah later on even mentions him in one of his poems, and he declared Guru Tegh Bahadur Singh as a Ghazi or um, a Muslim holy, victorious Muslim holy warrior. This is a term that is reserved for fighters in the way of Islam
Wow.
who
Okay.
Ghazi, they who distinguish themselves on the battlefield.
Right.
So we have
Okay.
Shaheed who are martyred at the
Sure.
battlefield, and we have Ghazi. They are the ones who survive, but they have distinguished themselves.
That's really
And
interesting because Guru Tegh Bahadur, he was an excellent swordsman.
ah,
He fought in many battles under his own father, Guru Hargobind. So that's really
yeah,
interesting. That he was kind of
well,
cognizant of that, of all of
yes,
that.
the with the battle, then after which Baba Bulleh Shah wrote this poem about Tegh Bahadur, the battle he was referring to, Guru Tegh Bahadur distinguished himself, and this is why Bulleh Shah declared him a Ghazi.
Right.
And Ghazi is not, it's not, we don't use it for other religions, normally Muslims. It's
Right,
reserved for
right.
a Muslim
Okay,
person who
okay.
distinguishes himself. So this really worried a lot of the Muslim elite,
Okay,
religious
okay,
elite, and general
okay.
elite, because they were saying he's sympathizing with the
Mm,
Sikhs. But
right.
he transcended, I have to say, as you can see from his poetry, transcended all of the faiths, but
Hmm, hmm.
he did say things as they were. And
Yeah,
he
yeah,
saw that, Guru Tegh Bahadur was a valiant soldier, and he described him as such. And then, of
yeah.
course, so that was the case. Then after that, Guru Gobind Singh, he was, Baba Bulleh Shah will have seen him,
Right.
and the change, because the Khalsa movement started in
Sure, sure.
1699 by
Yeah.
Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and Baba Bulleh Shah saw that movement starting, and he again mentions it in his poems about this change happening. And so basically, after Aurangzeb passed away, then the next rulers, they weren't so effective, and a
Hmm.
lot of power went down to the governors, etc. And
Right,
it left Hindustan open to attack. And Ahmed Shah
right.
Abdali, who was an Afghan emperor at the time, very,
Yes.
very powerful, he started raiding Hindustan, and he emptied out the treasuries. And each time, they say that some of the loot that was carried away, the carts of gold and treasury were miles long. You couldn't count
Hmm,
them.
hmm.
He just took
Absolutely.
everything. And so that caused a lot of poverty, starvation, disorderliness. And so this was very difficult time, and hence that proverb of yours as well. People couldn't, they had never seen anything like it, and they were thinking, when this is very vulnerable, our lives are vulnerable, we
Yeah.
can't have anything. And what Baba Bulleh Shah was saying is that he was sad, and he was crying for the Punjab. Okay,
Hmm.
he was sad at the sight of people starving. He was sad at the loss of harmony, the bloodshed that was being inflicted by the Mughal governors and rulers on the Sikhs.
Okay.
And so he didn't want any of this to happen. He did never felt that anybody should lose their lives on the basis of religion. Everybody
Hmm.
should be welcome to practice whatever faith they believe in.
Sure.
And so what happened was that with that, he lamented Punjab. He was a true son of Punjab, and this is why
Right.
he is loved to this day by
Sure.
everybody, every faith.
Hmm.
And he during this time he tried to help people starving. He instigated works at his own base. He loved having the langar at his base. With langar is free food, anybody could come and eat, and they would be fed, and that was part of the Sufi culture right from Baba Farid ji. And
Right.
so he loved providing free food for people. He actually instigated work at his place so that people could be employed and they could earn some money. And he tried to not negotiate, but he tried to um, cause harmony between Sikhs and Muslims, because that was the biggest clash going on.
Right.
And he tried to, tell both of them, and he may well have been in contact with Guru Gobind Singh Ji and with the Muslim governors, and he tried to say to them all, look, stop, we mustn't spill any blood, we should live together.
Right.
And
Right.
we are all the same, and we should live together. And of course, this kind of um, thinking, it annoyed a lot of the Muslim religious hierarchy.
Right.
The Qazis and the sheikhs. These are religious authorities
Right.
in Muslim culture, and they have a say on how Muslims live or how they should live. And so they were declaring fatwas against Baba Bulleh Shah, saying, "Stop! Don't do this. You stop. Don't have dances at your place."
Right.
They wanted to behave in a different way. But he actually physically tried to reduce the bloodshed at the time as well.
Right.
So an
Right.
amazing man, and
Hmm.
never cowed by, you know, fear of anything, and nothing, nobody could touch him.
Sure.
There were some bloodthirsty governors at the time. Ranveer, okay, the Mughal emperor was at the top, but on a local basis, it was semi-autonomous most of the time.
Yes.
The governors had a free hand. As long
Hmm.
as they sent in the taxes and wealth to the center, they could do whatever they want. And
Yeah.
some of them were extremely prejudiced against various things. They had their own agendas, and so all sorts of acts happened which made things worse and led to more and more tensions, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of my listeners and viewers will be familiar with this because that period of history in Punjab following Guru Gobind Singh, kind of the early 18th century, there was a lot of clash, and there wasn't necessarily a lot of clashes with the Bahadur Shah in terms of the Mughal
Yeah.
emperors. It was the governors like the Zakaria
Yes,
Khans and
abs
so on and so forth. And
absolutely.
actually, it's interesting how you described the invasion from Ahmad Shah Abdali. He invades Punjab and the rest of Hindustan, I think, 9 times. And when the kind of the sick kind of guerrilla warfare, which is obviously at the time
Yes,
happening,
yes,
they attack him on his way out, and
yes,
that eventually then leads to the formation of Sikh power.
yes,
Eventually to Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So
yes.
this all ties in. I've never heard that Baba Bulleh Shah was had a say in that as well, because often again, as someone who has never really read his poetry properly, I just saw him as a poet, and he
Ah,
had his own lane, and he kind
yes,
of stuck to that. But the fact that he was very proactive and outspoken, and as you say, tried to kind of navigate those spaces between the two communities and trying to kind of get them to
abs
come together, again,
absolutely.
it speaks to him as a Sufi, as a humanist, as somebody who's just trying to spread love and peace, right?
Yes.
Um, but
He
yeah,
was
it's interesting,
actually physically attacked on one occasion, and maybe
right?
more, because he was trying to intervene to protect someone who was being attacked by a mob. And
Right.
then the Muslims turned on him and they attacked him, and he was expelled from his village at the time. And
Okay.
it took some time before he returned. But, the thing is, he didn't hesitate to speak out. And this isn't, you see, that I think one thing I want to really make clear is that he it's not that he was pro this, anti that. He was
Hmm.
nothing like that. Only thing that mattered to him, Ranveer, was the truth
Sure.
and of living together happily with other people and with nature. And he didn't, if something was wrong, I mean, happening to Muslims, he didn't hesitate to voice
Right.
his opinions about that. He was very, very, but this is the reason, Ranveer, that there is such a strong following for him. One, that his Punjabi language is immensely powerful, and it gets right into your heart. But people can see him. Sikhs, Muslims, everybody, the Hindus, they can see that he was a person truly of not discriminating against anybody.
Hmm.
And doesn't matter what creed somebody was, if they're doing wrong, he would tell you. And
Right.
his voice still comes out very much like that, even today.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Um, so I've asked you about kind of how he was perceived and understood by his contemporaries. In terms of today in the 21st century, what's the significance of his poetry for both people living in Punjab and also outside of Punjab, perhaps in the West? What's the significance of it today?
Well, look, with his poetry, it's about, as I said, the base of it is about love and harmony. And, as I said, also, I've mentioned nature because he was very much into, planting trees and plants, and he loved nature and birds and animals. And he was a vegetarian. I mean, in those days, for a Muslim to be vegetarian, I don't know. I mean, but this was out of choice. It wasn't that
Right.
he, for some reason. So, he actually cared about the environment and the nature and also of the people. And these are things I almost feel like he was born 300 years too early, because what he was talking about, Ranveer, is
Yeah.
these are the topics of today.
Sure.
And
Sure. Yeah.
if people listen to what he's saying, it's as relevant now as it was then. And it's even more relevant to some extent because I think we're also going through a time of turbulence to some extent. And what I think his answer to this is that listen, don't focus on physical things, or physical, don't focus on rituals alone. Don't focus on buildings. Don't focus on temples, don't focus on mosques, don't focus on
Materialism. Yeah.
these things that are you have created,
Hmm.
um, but focus on beyond that.
Sure,
And,
sure.
one of his, if you go anywhere in Pakistani Punjab or anywhere, and speak to anyone, the one poem, one Kafi everybody recognizes of Bulleh Shah is Mandir Ta De, and this is in the
Mm.
book as well. And
Hmm.
he says basically, Mandir Ta De, Masjid Ta De jo kuch tenda, ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦੇ ਦਾ ਦਿਲ ਨਾ ਟਾਵੀਂ ਕਿ ਰੱਬ
Mm.
ਦਿਲਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ. So
Hmm. Hmm.
what our point of that is that what he's saying is that he's not saying go and demolish these places. What he's addressing people who are inclined to do that. They're like, oh, I'm going to go and demolish this mosque because it's that land was mine, or
Hmm.
I'm going to demolish this temple because that was put up on a mosque.
Right.
He's saying get beyond that.
Hmm.
And these things, they're not they are if you are going to demolish them, let them go and do it. It doesn't matter. This doesn't it doesn't shouldn't drive me to then take up and then go and kill somebody, or
Right.
to lead to violence. And
Sure.
he's saying that the thing is that anything physically man built, you can demolish it, it can be rebuilt, maybe, it doesn't matter, but don't break somebody's heart, because
Hmm.
that's where the true pain and hurt is. And
Right.
of course, Ranveer, if you think about it, that if you or I think about breaking somebody's heart, then would we go and demolish one of their places of worship? Somebody's place of worship would say, no, no, that's going to hurt this person. If I do demolish this or knock this down or do something like that, this is going to hurt these people's feelings. You don't do things to hurt other people's feelings.
Sure.
So if you
Sure.
thought that, you'd never go and do the demolishing
Of
in the
course.
first place.
Yeah.
So you see, this is his message now as well, is, live happily together. There are more ways to your destination than one. And, you can reach God in many different ways, but the important thing is you find that God. And
Hmm.
then all these other things, if somebody does that thing to you to hurt you, well, those people, they've got to answer for themselves. But to some extent, he sees God in everybody, even Wazir Khan or whatever. There is an element of God in all of us, isn't it? And
Hmm.
what it is that people are suppressing that with their ego.
Ego.
So
Yeah.
some people will be suppressing it to a bigger extent, other people to
Sure.
lesser
Sure.
extent. So this is why it's so relevant today, because, as I said, he didn't believe in religious divide. He wanted nature. He didn't believe in any color discrimination. He hated caste system.
Right.
And he rejected that completely, because he himself, if you imagine, I mean, we don't have a caste system in Islam, but he was kind of a high caste because he was descended through our Prophet's holy family. He could trace
Right.
his line back directly to
Okay.
the
Okay.
family of our Prophet. So he was a Sayyid. And Sayyids are held in high regard, and
Right.
they're expected to behave in a particular way. But he didn't take any notice of that. And so
Right.
he got a lot of anger from his own family and his friends because
Right.
he wasn't behaving in an expected way. So he
Okay.
rejected caste. He didn't believe in problems with gender, how people lived. One of his famous saying is that Kanjri banya zaat nahi katdi. So, if Kanjri is a dancing woman, it's a derogatory term nowadays, used as a
Hmm.
derogatory way. But he says that even people who are that lowly behaving, they still the zat means their nature, not their caste, but their
Right.
zat. It doesn't get affected. It's part of that is God given. That is there. It
Right.
doesn't matter how this person has to live or how she behaves, what state she behaves in. So there was no gender element. And it's interesting that one of the most famous Christian saints from the ninth century, he also said virtually exactly the same thing, that being a prostitute or whatever, it doesn't
Yeah.
reduce your nature. So these
Mhm.
thinkings are there, and it's just that person has to see that there is a light there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. I think I've certainly learned a lot. I mean, I've learned a lot throughout the whole, book publishing process with you on this. Because like I said, prior to, meeting you and reading your version of this, I had I think a particular, perspective. And I think you've changed a lot of that. And I think what I will say is, again, for those who are listening and watching, the book itself is amazing because of the way you presented it in both the Gurmukhi Shahmukhi, the translation, but actually at the very beginning of the book, in the introduction, there's a few pages where you kind of contextualize, who he was. A lot of what you've spoken about today, and I think that's really important as well. Somebody once said to me that before reading a book, read the author. To understand, his worldview, right? To understand where he's coming from. So I think that's hugely important. So thank you, thank you once again. The only last question I have for you actually is, what are your hopes with the book?
Yes. Well, one thing I would say is, I mean, I would never presume myself to be of any merit literary or whatever, but it's just a little effort on my part. And if if I have made it sort of known to some more new people, that's wonderful. But the
Yeah.
hopes for the book, I mean, my biggest fear was that, somebody might say, well, what's this, what's he think he's writing about? I've
Yeah.
never written a book before, and I'm not in that field, and I don't claim to be an academic or a writer. But my hope is that through this book, as you say, for example, you have learned about more
Mhm.
about Baba Bulleh. You were aware of him, but I hope that number one is that I preserve this work, and it's that it's not lost. It sets more people thinking about Bulleh Shah and what he stood for, and introduces him to a new generation of people
Sure.
who are looking for their own cultural heritage and thinking, where is our thinkers? Where are our people who we can admire? And so my hope for the book is that people would like it. They would find it helpful. They would find it interesting, and that it would preserve some of Baba Bulleh Shah's work, and also introduce him to a new generation of Punjabis across the world, because we are no longer confined to the Punjab of Asia,
Sure.
but we are all over the world. And I think people are searching for their roots to some extent. And I hope this is a little step towards that. I would say just one thing is that I think, as you might have thought, that the poems are beautiful, but they are cultural, and they have got context.
Right.
So reading them directly, there is one part of it, and it's important to know what he was talking about. But I also feel that I think that context needs to be
Mhm.
explained to some extent. So, Ranveer, just to say that I'm trying to work out on a way of having perhaps something to kind of not translate, but to give an opinion about what each of the poem was about and the
Right.
background to it. So maybe, that is something that I would really like to do, so that people can actually understand what is being meant in the poems. Like
Okay.
I've
Okay.
talked about Garyali Devo Nagalni.
Sure.
You
Sure.
can interpret it in so many different ways, but what I thought is I might sort of try and do some work of just going through these poems and explaining what they are about as well.
Yeah, I think that would be amazing, like almost like a running commentary of what
Yes.
each poem is. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah. In this one, I was very committed, very much in favor of one. I wanted to write it in Shahmukhi and Gurmukhi. Number two, I wanted to write it in transliteration because the vision for this book is that it's for people of the West, maybe mainly, of
mm,
people who may not be familiar with reading those languages. So I wanted to do that and preserve that. But
right.
I think the next aspect is, I think, to really gain the benefit of his thought, it would be really good to perhaps explain a little bit about each of the poem, and then that might help people in their interpretation.
Sure. That sounds amazing, and I look forward to that as well. So yeah.
Uh,
So yeah, thank you very much for taking the time out this morning to speak with me about the book. Congratulations again as well.
Thank you.
So again, for those who are watching and listening, the book is available to order via khalishouse.com. It's also available on global Amazon markets. Go out there, support the work. It's a phenomenal piece of work. As I said, hopefully you've learned a bit about Baba Bulleh Shah throughout this short podcast as well. But really, the work is done when you go out and read for yourself. So I'm sure we'll stay in touch, Wasim. But thank you once again, and have a great day.
Yeah, Ranveer, one final thought. I would just like to thank very much yourself and Khalis House for giving me the opportunity to publish this book. I mean, you've been phenomenal in your help, and I'm really grateful. And I appreciate all of your personal help, but also of Khalis House for giving me this opportunity of, doing this little work and see, hopefully it will help a lot of people learn a little bit more about Baba Bulleh Shah.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you for your kind words.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranveer. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Take care. Have a good day.